In this video, I am going to talk through the key financial ratios to assess your financial health. There is a worksheet that you can download with this, and this video is to provide more detail so that you can understand how to calculate your own numbers. All right, so let's get started. So the first ratio is the savings rate, and that is defined as your total savings divided by your gross income. So what counts as savings? Savings includes your contributions to your employer retirement plans like a 401k or 403b or 457. It includes contributions to your savings and personal investment accounts. If you receive employer stock, for example, RSUs that are vested and they're just sitting there, that can be considered part of your savings too. The amount that is vesting each year. And if you're one of the lucky few that still has a pension, the amount that you're putting towards your pension each year can also count towards your total savings. The next ratio is the tax rate, and that is defined as total taxes divided by gross income. So your taxes should include your federal and state income, and if you have any other local taxes on your income, include that as well. It should include Social Security, Medicare, anything you're paying there, and if you have property tax, include that as well. So just one note here in terms of exceptions. So if you are earning a high income, the usual advice is that you want to lower your taxable income as much as possible. So for example, by contributing to a pre-tax 401k. But if your income in a given particular year is lower than usual, perhaps you're taking a year off, or you're in between jobs, or you're starting your own business, or you're retiring early, this could actually be an opportunity to realize more taxable income. So for example, you can do that through a Roth conversion or tax gain harvesting so that you're paying taxes at a lower rate. Okay. The next ratio is the burn rate. And the burn rate is defined as total expenses, all the expenses that you spend to cover your operating costs as a household, divided by your gross income. So household total expenses should include your housing costs, whether that's mortgage or rent, all your living expenses, essential and discretionary, and any debt payments. One thing is just don't forget, in terms of living expenses, do not forget those irregular big expenses that happen each year, but they don't happen on a monthly basis. So for example, vacation, that's a common one. And it's just that when clients give me their spending, their budgets and their spending plans, I often see it undercounting these irregular big expenses. So I just want to make sure that you are including that. Okay, next. So the next ratio is the financial independence ratio. So one note on this is just that when you're reading about retirement, if you're reading articles or whatnot, you'll see oftentimes that retirement experts will be assessing your retirement readiness based on how much you've saved as a multiple of your income. But actually, I think it's better to look at your savings as a multiple of expenses, because really that is what matters. And your expenses are going to be most likely more stable than looking at income. Like for example, if you have variable income, or also if you have a high income, a lot of that might be going towards taxes. So it's just kind of hard to assess. So that's why we use expenses instead of income in this ratio. Okay, so what is included in this net worth number? I would include all the assets that you have that you can use to feed yourself. So this would mean, of course, your investment and your retirement accounts and your savings, but I would generally exclude primary residence, because while you can live in your home, unless you're going to rent it out or unless you're planning on selling it, it is not going to produce income that you can live off of in retirement. And if you have any other assets that you intend to never sell and never produce income out of, don't include that either. Okay, and then in terms of expenses, this should be your estimated expenses once you stop working. So you might think, well, that obviously should be less than my current expenses, because maybe you expect that your mortgage will be paid off or your kids will be out of the house, but you could also have more expenses too. For example, healthcare, you have to pay for your own healthcare, or maybe you intend to travel a lot in your retirement. So just be realistic in your estimated expenses post financial independence. The next ratio is your liquidity or emergency fund ratio. So your liquid assets is money that you can access in a couple of business days. That's generally your checking, your savings account. Could also be, money in your investment account that's, invested in a money market fund. Just one note here is that what I tend to see, especially with women, is very high cash balances. because it makes us feel safer that we have access to money just in case. And, I get it because I also fell into that camp, right? So I just want to say that it is important to remember that the money in your investment accounts can also be accessed in a couple of business days. So if one of your just in case situation happens and you unexpectedly need more money than what's in your emergency fund, you can always sell investments and raise cash. Okay. Now, of course, there is a risk to selling investments, and there's more to think about there. And if you have a planned expenditure for the next 1 to 2 years, we'll always want to set that money aside outside of your portfolio. But it is important to not fall into the trap of hoarding too much cash just for the sake of just in case, because there is a real opportunity cost to doing that. Okay. The next ratio is concentration ratio. So when I say concentrated position, most likely this takes the form of, for people who receive employer stock, it's their employer, it's RSUs, or it could be in the money stock options that you're just holding on to. Or it could be that Apple stock that you inherited from your grandpa or that you bought yourself early on. How much is right to hold really depends on your situation, your risk tolerance, and how much your financial goals can be funded by your other assets. But the point why I include this ratio into this assessment is that if you have a concentrated position, then you probably have an emotional attachment to this particular asset. And so it's just, call it that. It's important to try to take an objective view about it and make sure that you just don't have too much risk concentrated in this one position. Okay, speaking of risk, these last two ratios are about risk. So this first one is life insurance ratio. So, the thing is, when you think about financial planning, yes, part of it is how do you grow your wealth and manage your income, but also how do you manage your risk from things that you just can't protect yourself from, and premature death or unexpected death is one of these, right? So, if you're earning a good income and you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, then your biggest asset is most likely not your 401k or your investment account. It is your human capital. And that's why we got to protect it. So the ratio that I would consider is your life insurance coverage, how much you have coverage there, plus your liquid net worth divided by gross income should be around 12 times. So for example, let's say you make $250,000 a year. Let's say you have $1.5 million of assets between you and your spouse's investment and retirement accounts. Well, to get to the 12x target, you might want to consider buying a life insurance policy of $1.5 million. Okay, so obviously this is very much of a starting point for the discussion. Each family is unique, and so you might do more or less depending on your situation and preference. Okay, the last ratio is long-term care insurance ratio. So, once you have done the big job of saving enough assets to fund your financial independence, then really your main remaining risk is the cost of aging and illness. And that is what this ratio is meant to assess. So this ratio is defined as your estimated annual income in retirement divided by estimated annual long-term care cost. So just based on current cost of a home health aide in the Bay Area, it's around $90,000 a year. Home health aides are generally the first place where people file one of these long-term care claims. If you were to get, say, a private nursing care home, that could be upwards of $100K, $120K plus for an individual. Okay, but let's just say it's $90K for an individual, $180K for a couple. And the risk here is really not that you're going to need it for 1 or 2 years. Most likely you could cover that yourself, but it's more that you're going to need it for a decade or more. You can need it for a lot of years, right? You just don't know what shape you'll be in, or in your 80s and 90s or beyond. So if you have enough retirement income, if your annual income in retirement is greater than that cost, then you should be able to indefinitely cover your long-term care cost. But if it can't, which means the ratio is less than 1, then I would at least educate yourself about long-term care insurance and consider it. The thing about this is that it is expensive, it's not cheap to do, but let's say you do end up in a situation where you need long-term care for 10, 15, 20 years, right? Can you afford that? And if not, what's going to happen? And unfortunately, there's just not enough, there's not great safety nets in our society to be able to support that today. So that's it. I hope this is helpful, and please Let me know if you have any questions, and let me know if you have any feedback about the ratios or the targets. I would be happy to discuss. Thank you so much.